I'm Devin, a life coach.
I'm Meg, a death doula. And this podcast is what happens when a life coach and a death doula walk into a bar.
Honest conversations about grief, joy, and who gets your mother's pearl earrings. Nothing is off limits.
And it all goes back to death.
Hi.
Hi, Lovey. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? We've been doing such a good job. Sorry to interrupt you. We've been doing such a good job of not chatting too much in between recording these episodes so that we have so many things to talk about.
And thank God we have texting, though.
I know. We text 24,000 times a day. But how are you? How's your week?
Good. I had an interesting week. I had a friend come to Florida with her mom and her dad's ashes to bury the ashes. And they took him on a tour. And they took him to all the places that he introduced them to as a family. Yeah. I mean, I think they went to 5 different places. And so they invited me to one of them. So I went down and visited and had dinner and celebrated him. And it's just amazing. I mean, can you imagine somebody doing that for you?
No, but I would love that.
Right?
Yeah. Like, what was the vibe?
Oh, the vibe was tears, and the vibe was laughing, and the vibe was champagne. You know, it was like life. It was all over the place.
Yeah.
It was wonderful.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I feel like when it comes to, especially now that we've been having so many conversations, I really have been thinking about, like, okay, what do I want to have happen when I die?
Good.
I know that a lot of people think that that's a morbid conversation, but it's part of what we're doing here is, getting people to maybe think about the fact that we have choice even in whatever afterworld there is. But I definitely want there to be some sort of like fun involved and not have it be just constant tears and crying. Like, I like the idea of it being like life where it can be all over the place. It's natural for people to be tearing up, but I feel like sometimes when you get into like a funeral home or a church even, it's so somber. And I really don't want that. So something like that sounds fun. Like, go do a bar crawl, not with my ashes. I don't want my ashes anywhere near
Yeah, it was
anybody.
like a life tour, and we should work on that. I think we do have a form on our website about what we want, but we should really hone in on those forms and help people write it out and talk about it and make things up.
Yeah, I know. I think that that's part of it too, is that we just are so like confined in our thought process about what this process has to look like. And so getting beyond that, and you and I talk about this all the time, and we will get into having a living wake and things that, are less traditional. But I feel like every time you and I converse about what we want to have happen, it's always about celebration and our favorite things, and not just about, oh, this is so sad, or, oh, this is, even, I don't even necessarily think that it needs to be like in memoriam, like I think that it can just be, this person's energy is here, and what would they want us to experience? But yeah, I think
the beauty of it, though, is you are in control of it now. And so it's giving you control over it even when you're dead. So imagine anything you want, and do what you want and discuss it with your loved ones.
Yeah, big time discussion with your loved ones.
Yeah.
Speaking of discussions with your loved ones, I watched Voicemails for Isabel, which I sobbed my way. It was actually dramatic. I think I needed a cry to begin with, which I just, I enjoy crying. So I feel like when I need it, it just flows. But I watched probably 12 minutes in, I was making popcorn and I was in my kitchen literally being like, can I get through this? Like, I've not felt that way about a movie in, I don't know, maybe ever, but I have such a close relationship with my sister, and we do call each other 30,000 times a day, especially now that she has kids and we FaceTime. And the thought of not being able to do that was like overwhelming to me in a way that surprised me. I called her right afterwards and I was like, you can't watch this movie. You
Yeah.
will not be able to make it through. She's pregnant. There's a lot going on. I was like, it's not for you.
But I think I texted you. I was like 13 minutes and 39 seconds and I was sobbing. I held off for 13 minutes.
Yeah.
But really, let's talk about, so she calls her sister, spoiler alert, through the whole movie.
Mhm.
But at the end of the movie, when she says to her sister, I'm not calling you anymore,
I know.
that's when I lost it.
Me too. I just got full body chills as you said it.
I mean, it was just amazing. It was highly recommended.
Yeah.
People have to watch that.
And it's funny because in that same scene, there's this sort of sign that comes from her sister, something that you and I talk about all the time, that spirit or, you know, your loved one's energy communicates through songs a lot of times and, you know, just random things happening, lights flickering in ways or whatever else. And so I thought that that was such a perfect way. But it's interesting when she said that, when she said, this is my last call to you, I had such a like, no, you have to keep calling her. I know it was honestly the whole movie, the way that I reacted to so many of the things. And I think it's partially about having a niece now also that I was sort of like, oh my God, you grow up, you have siblings. Like it was a lot going on in my head. And I just felt like by the end of it, when she said, this is my last phone call, I was like, no, you have to keep calling her.
And
Like I really,
and for
yeah.
me, I was like, yes.
I know, because you're securely attached, which is you have secure attachment.
I was just so happy that she had worked through whatever level of grief and put it somewhere and was able not to let it go because you never let it go, but she didn't need that anymore. It didn't impact her love. She still
Yeah.
had the love, but she didn't need to do that anymore. To me, I was like, that's the goal.
Yeah. And it is so true. And I've worked with a lot of clients in grief that there are those moments where at the beginning of our work together, things like taking a ring off or changing a phone number, like things that you don't really think about when the person is dying, but then afterward become this total security blanket for you or this total comfort for you. And I do feel like when those things become less of an attachment, it is a major hurdle that they've jumped over. Like I feel like it's a huge obstacle. And I do feel proud, you know, or happy for someone when that isn't the same level of attachment that it once was. But in that incident in particular, I don't know what it was. I was so like, oh my God, no, this is the whole point.
weren't
Like
ready.
you have
You
to
weren't
call
ready.
each other. Yeah. Yeah, I was not ready, but it was an interesting whole thing. And also, I actually found myself, I've had a week by myself, which I feel like my life kind of moves in phases like that, where I'm with a million people for like a 2 or 3 week stretch. And then I have like 1 week where it's just me, myself, and I really get to focus and think through all of my thoughts that I have, which is sometimes a scary thing to do,
Good and
but
bad.
also, yeah, very necessary. But I also found myself, I have a friend who lost her grandmother like 3 or 4 weeks ago. And I found myself this week really questioning, like, have I checked in enough? Have I done enough for them? And I felt like I was very present in like the first couple weeks, but it is what we talk about a lot of times, that life resumes. And when you're in it, on the other side of it, you feel like your life is never the same. And it, you know, you can't believe that the world keeps moving. But it's interesting to be on the other side and wanting to be such a support. And also, you and I talk about this all the time. I'm not the type of person who wouldn't just text somebody and say, hey, I'm thinking about you and I just want to make sure that, you know, you're okay. So I did that. But in that, I was just feeling like, oh, on the other side of this, it is sometimes difficult to remember to check in on people and to be as present as you want to be emotionally for someone, knowing that in some, you know, times our capacity is different. And also that, yeah, life does keep moving and it's really hard, I think, when it's not directly affecting you to remember to be checking in on that aspect. Like I've spoken to them so many times since then, but not always in the way of how are you doing? What can I do?
And,
Just an interesting
you can
thought.
only do what you can do, right? And
Yeah.
so when it comes to you and it comes from the heart, checking in, no response required, thinking of you, there's no right answer, but reaching out when you think of it means a lot.
And I think that that's really all we can do in many, stretches of all of our lives that are busy and that, feel overwhelming sometimes. And there is sometimes that guilt of have I been there enough for someone or have I reached out enough for someone, to someone? And I think that that's kind of what I go back to is just if you think of it, you send the message.
Right.
And, that's the right thing to do.
Yep. Well, all right. So what do you want to talk about today?
I think we should talk about hospice. I think
Okay.
we should just dive right into it.
That's a big one. That could be a couple episodes,
There could
but
be a couple episodes. Yeah.
yeah.
But I think that, at least from my standpoint, as just
Mhm.
sort of the lay person, until you and I started having our discussions about end of life and hospice and all these other things, I had assumed that hospice was this one very specific thing. And it turns out that it's a very different thing than what I thought it was. And so when we're talking to our listeners, I want you in particular, the expert, the death doula, to let people know really what hospice is all about, first of all, and also to maybe clear up some of the misconceptions. Because in my mind, hospice is the thing that comes in, the people, the organization that comes in like 72 hours before someone dies. That's just my experience is that, okay, this is the very end. Now you bring this system in. And since you and I have been talking, obviously I've found that there's, a lot of misconception around that. But let's start with what is hospice?
So hospice is first and foremost a business. I think when you're in the situation when hospice comes up, I thought it's just these angels that exist that come in and help you. And they are angels that come in and help you.
Mhm.
But it's a business and it's paid for by Medicare. And it's basically managing the symptoms of the person that's dying. So it's tight symptom management. Okay. And so Medicare will pay hospice per day a flat rate of, I think it's about $200 a day to provide services. Now, whether they come to your house or not, they get paid those days. And they don't need to come to your house every day because if the symptoms are being managed, all is good, right? So they'll come in, a nurse will come 1, 2, 3 times a week, depending on the case. You'll get, a house aide to help with, things like housekeeping or even helping the person go to the bathroom, things like that. It's a great service, but what people don't understand is there's 24 hours in a day. And the best case scenario is you're going to get 3 hours, maybe a couple days a week. That's just how it goes. So who's doing the other 20 something hours? And that is a real hard position to be in when you know nothing about what is going on. When you bring someone home to die, your instinct is to help them live. It just is. And so you need to really understand the process of how this person's going to die. So there's many different diseases and diagnosis. So for example, like if you're going to die of a liver disease, you're going to get this fluid that builds up in your abdomen, and then you have to get that tapped. And at some point, the tapping doesn't keep up with the fluid. And so that's when you have to administer the morphine. So that's very different than, say, acute myeloid leukemia, which is where the patient is just going to fall asleep.
Right.
So there's all these different disease diagnosis. And I have this book called The Good Death, by Suzanne B. O'Brien. She goes through like the top 10 diagnoses. She goes through the symptoms to look for. She goes through the symptom management and the medication. Now, that is a lot to take in all of a sudden when you're responsible for somebody's symptoms.
And you're
And
emotionally attached to the situation at the same time. I mean, it's not like these people who are in their homes, caring for someone are doctors or
no,
nurses
we're
usually.
lay people,
Right.
and we are lay people with our loved ones. And when the bomb drops of the diagnosis and the word terminal, and then all of a sudden, you acquire a hospice service, which you don't even know that you have choices or that you can communicate with them and interview them and, have different needs. You just, things are coming at you so fast. And then all of a sudden you have this person in your house and then you're taking care of them. It's really crazy. So it's really important to have the conversation with the hospice that you pick
Mhm.
and whoever the nurse is to say, please explain to me how this is going to go. And please tell me what I'm looking for. And please teach me how to do this, which is what they do. But you need to ask a lot of questions and don't be afraid. And for example, when they come, they bring this black box. And in the black box are medicines like lorazepam, Haldol, atropine drops, Zofran, Tylenol, morphine. This is all stuff you're going to be giving,
Yeah, that's
right?
heavy. Hmm.
Very heavy. What's cool is they tell you to put it in the refrigerator, not because any of these things need to be kept cold, but it's because they know how crazy it is and you're going to lose it or misplace it. So they say, keep it in the fridge, which is brilliant,
Yeah, so smart.
right? Because you're frantic when all of a sudden somebody's having these agitation things and you're like, where's the Ativan? Oh, it's in the
Yeah.
fridge. So it's things like that that you work with your hospice team on a really tight base. And if you don't like what's going on, you get a different one. And they can change very fast. You can have one out the door and you can have one in the door within a couple hours.
Yeah, that is something that I feel like there's a major misconception about just the fact that hospice is a business in general, and that if you don't like whoever you're working with, that you can fire and hire or, have somebody from the same place come and uh yeah, take over. But I think that it's interesting because when you say this to me, right? And I don't have to do any of these things tomorrow, the next day, hopefully for a very long time, I'm overwhelmed by just the level of responsibility because I think that to your point, one, people are committed to helping people live. And we talk about this when it comes to food intake a lot, right?
Dangerous. Yeah,
Dangerous. Yeah. Like when your body is shutting down, you don't need food and your body starts to reject, whatever
correct.
you're giving it. So even that, right? And you think about, especially in a familial structure, for many people, food is love. Like, this is how I love you. I'm going to make you soup. I'm going to make you all these different things. And, when my grandfather was at the end of his life, that was a big thing was he's not eating. What does he want? What is he craving? And the reality is that obviously his body was preparing for something that we weren't aware of at the time.
Right.
But I
And
do
it's
think,
also giving somebody food, you think, oh, well, if they eat, they'll live one more day.
yeah, it's nourishment, right?
Yeah,
That's how we associate it with, source is okay, if I eat, then I stay alive.
right.
But I think that if you're listening to this, for example, and are feeling overwhelmed, like where do you think that the lay person in hospice research or just in the process starts baseline? Like what is the first step of either getting someone in there or starting the conversation? Because I think that that's what you're talking about right now. I don't know that everyone has that conversation in detail. So like what would you ask if somebody were coming into my house tomorrow and starting hospice? What is my first question to them?
So you would say, here's a question that I learned very early on. What do you offer for respite care? Now, respite care is care that's given to the patient for 5 days, 24 hours a day, to give the caregiver rest. Now, I had no idea that that existed.
Mm-hmm.
And when I brought my dad home, my kids were between the ages of 10 and 15, and I was by myself because my husband traveled. I didn't know what I was doing, but the oncology nurse pulled me aside and she said, "You can do this. He has leukemia and he's just going to fall asleep. It's not going to be a hard one. You can do this." If she hadn't said that to me, I don't know if I would have done it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the nurse that we had with our hospice, she came in and she saw the household, and she saw, they come in and they look and they see your team, like your family, your friends, who's going to help. And I think she thought, wow, this girl, it's a lot. So she said to me, "We're not going to wait to do the respite care at his end of life. We're going to do it when he's the most difficult to take care of, because you can't do the physical aspect of this yourself." So when he was really needy, like getting up to go to the bathroom, which was a risk, it was dangerous at that point, and you have to keep safety in mind for the patient. You don't want them getting hurt, going to the hospital and dying there, because they want to die at home. So you have to keep them safe. So she did this respite care when he was really his hardest to take care of. Then when that was over, lucky enough, we did hire one of their CNAs to do the nighttime. So I could sleep and then I would do the daytime. So I think the most important thing is finding out what services the hospice offers. Some offer Reiki, they offer different things. I would find out what they offer. I would find out their philosophy on respite care, because the next time I did it, I called and I said, "Can we do respite care? I think he's dying and, we need help." And the nurse said, "It's not time yet." And he died the next day. So I think talking about their philosophy on respite care, and I think whatever else they offer, I think communicating with them what kind of team you have or what kind of team you don't have will determine how many times they come. And I just think having a really good understanding of the process of the disease from them and how you're going to manage it with them. And, if you have a good friend, if you know a doula, if you have somebody that can help you, it's really hard to do this alone. And I think the beauty of talking about this now is I'm going to be 60. And so we're doing this for our parents, and we're doing this kind of for each other. And we're not that good at it. Nobody knows what it is. Nobody knows how to do it till you're in it. But you're 30 or 32. And hopefully you're not having to do it with your friends or with your parents right now. But you guys, if you're listening now and you're learning now and you're getting involved in it now, imagine how good you're going to be. Imagine your generation is going to change how this goes.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of like therapy, right? Like you think about how different the generation's attitudes towards therapy have been, and how much better now someone who's Gen Z, let's say, understands therapeutic language and the way that family dynamics work and the way that, relationships work in different ways, and all of these sort of things that I feel like even Gen X boomers had no desire to learn or understand. This is sort of that conversation, in the sense that, yes, I find that us having these conversations, and, I've been through a lot of personal death just in the last couple of years. So it's been a conversation, but not necessarily in the way of, what can we proactively do to help people in end of life? And I think that that's part of when we talk about things like wanting to keep people alive, there is great respect, care in helping someone die. And so I think that when you kind of can shift that narrative and get past this desperation almost to keep someone here physically, and instead say, what is going to make this process best and easiest for them, and also give me a chance to really kind of process alongside with them instead of just holding on for dear life and hoping that it doesn't end, but really saying, kind of taking yourself out of the equation in the sense that you can say, instead of trying to get this person to live, how can I assist them, in
Right.
dying or in,
And
in end of life?
through communication with your hospice, it's kind of taking your emotional hat off or your relationship hat off. Okay, I'm not going to be the daughter. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to help with the management of these symptoms to keep this person as comfortable as possible. And while they're comfortable and they're transitioning, and I'm not freaking out, for example, like they get a fever. And then I remember one time I walked into the room and the room was 1,000 degrees. It was crazy. It was the person giving off the heat because the fever was so high.
Hmm.
So we immediately gave a Tylenol suppository, brought the fever down, and just got back to a place of peace. Instead of freaking out, calling 911, what's happening? If you know all these things and you get educated by your hospice team, then you go through it, keeping them comfortable, keeping them calm, keeping them, safe, and then they have a peaceful passing, and you're present to witness it and help with it. Your grief is 1,000 times better.
Yeah. And I think that that's a major point and piece of all of this is that there is the end of life piece of things. And then there is the fact that that person's no longer here and you're left with, how do I grieve what just happened? And we've talked about this before. And again, my grandfather passed a year ago and I was involved in that process. And my grief in that was very different than I think it could have been. And I also think that because you're processing in real time and alongside with the person essentially until you're not, that you understand that, like, okay, this is what needed to happen. All of this, when you're in it and you really see the suffering, especially, and even if it is a peaceful, mortality, there's still mortality. There's still an ending. There's still sort of this shock of, okay, this person was here and now they're no longer here. And so, yeah, it feels very empowering having been in the position of seeing someone sort of through that journey to come out the other side and say, one, did everything that we could. Two, it really was that person's time to go. There was nothing else that could have happened, or, no way that they would have been comfortable and also stayed with us. And in that, there is an element of closure when you do sort of see it through to the end in a way that's not, of course, it's emotional. Of course, you still have big feelings about things. I mean, I think that for me, it was always like, okay, when you get in the shower at the end of the night, that's when you cry, right? For me, that was sort of like the release. There's so much, encapsulated in that whole journey in terms of just the emotionality of it. But I do think that there is, yeah, a level of peace, a level of calm that when you know that you've seen something through, it's the end. And the grief process after that, sort of where you touch that rock bottom moment of they're gone and how you, swim back up to the surface. Yes, there is a big difference, I think, for people who are not involved. And I understand that some people truly can't be. So there's
Mhm.
that piece too. But if you can be, if you have the capacity, if you have the desire to be able to know what to do, and to your point, stay somewhat calm and help this person, it's very empowering.
And if you think about it from the person's position, sometimes when our senses are dulled, other senses are heightened. And I'm a believer that hearing is heightened at the end of life, and I really believe that they can hear everything.
Mhm.
And can you imagine trying to transition and going through this process and people just being literally nuts because they don't know what they're doing. They're fighting with each other. They're, you know, scared. They're anxious. I mean, you hear all that. So if your team or your children or whoever is caring for you is educated and has realistic expectations, it's just going to be so much better for the person receiving the care.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, it really is a selfless thing in a lot of ways. And I think that that's part of sort of how we have to talk about this, is that there is an element of just pure selflessness that goes into this process of wanting someone's end of life experience to be better and more comfortable
Mm-hmm.
than your experience in the moment, because it is scary and it is really difficult, and there are a lot of ups and downs. And you say this all the time, like the week before death and weddings don't count.
Oh,
Is
yeah. The
that
emotions
you're
don't
saying?
count. Yeah. The
Yeah.
fights don't count before a wedding and a funeral. They don't count.
Yeah. So, which is true, I think, in a lot of ways. When I look back on any experience that I've had in either of those situations, honestly,
It
it
gets
is
nuts.
very, yeah, it's true. And, so things are heightened, and that's all understandable. But even if you have moments of that versus hours of that, days of that, that's a huge difference.
And, back to your point of 72 hours, your concept of hospice was, oh, you call them in about 72 hours.
Yeah.
Well, that you can have hospice for 6 months. You can graduate and get another 6 months. I think one of the problems is we wait too long. And if you only have 48 hours or whatever, that's a very short time to do everything we just talked about.
Yeah.
I mean, it takes a minute to acclimate to what's happening, and then they die. Well, wait a minute. Like, we just need to get on hospice sooner. And sometimes they say people even live longer because they're comfortable longer.
Yeah.
And plus, you get all the services in your house. Why wouldn't you? You get medication delivered to you. You get a hospital bed. You get a wheelchair. You get a walker. You get oxygen. You get everything you need. So you can get where you need to be. You have a longer time to do this right. When we wait, it's just a 24-hour crazy town or a 48-hour crazy town.
So how do you think that people should gauge when someone is ready for hospice? Because I think that part of it is that you're listening to doctors tell
Right.
you what to do. And so sometimes the doctor just says, I mean, you can, but you don't need to. So, like, is it at that first moment that it's mentioned? Is it when you start to see the decline?
Well, I guess it's up to the patient and how they feel, what they've been through, how old they are, and I think our medical system just continues to try and try and try and doesn't really have the conversation about, or, you could live comfortably okay, so say we go through drastic treatment to get another year, or you could live very comfortably for 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
That's a choice.
Yeah.
To get on hospice, a doctor has to evaluate you and give the okay. But I think it's rare nowadays that would come up first. I think it's try medically. And I think having the conversations at your age, having the conversation say, you know what? When I get to the point that I can't do this and I can't do that, I don't want to live anymore.
Yeah.
Or I want to live well for the rest of my life comfortably at home with my loved ones. So that's really very individual.
Yeah. And it's funny when you said that. So I have a best friend of 30 years who is like my ride or die person. We know everything. We say nothing. Everything's going to the grave. And
She
she
knows
is
where
my
the bodies are
person.
buried.
Totally.
Yeah,
And helped me bury them.
good.
But, just really like my person. And I have said to her, we always, first of all, we want to die on the same day. Okay. That's our first,
Okay.
most ideal situation. And our life kind of works like that, where things do happen to us at the same time. So there's a good chance. And we want to die like when we're in our 90s, but having a margarita and at the same exact time. If that's not possible, we have both said, listen, if I'm someone who loves to be engaged, alive, talking, and all of those things can't happen for me anymore, that's when someone needs to step in and say, this is not what she would want if I can't do it for myself. And, we joke about it now because we are sitting on a back porch somewhere drinking margaritas in our 30s. So it doesn't seem as imminent. But I do think having the conversation, like there is a peace of mind knowing that this person knows exactly what I want and what I don't want. And really like has my back enough to say, yeah, okay, if it gets to that point, then this is when we call hospice. And she'd rather live 6 months really well than a year of, poking and prodding and doing all these different things. So even if you have the conversation with just one person in your life who is like a trusted, even if it's kind of in a joking way, to sort of get those feelers out and say, this is what I'm thinking. I think that that's a very helpful conversation to be able to have. And I think that very few people think that that's a conversation that can be light, dare I say, but it can be. It can be, okay, P.S. If this ever comes down to it, this is what needs to happen.
Well, it can be light when you're not in the situation. But when you're in the
Right.
situation and the person tells you what they want, you have to accept it. It's not your decision. So, for example, like my dad, he could have probably lived for a year with treatment. And so he tried one round of the treatment and it was awful. It was for many reasons. And he said, I'm not doing this. Now, did I want him for another year? More than anything in the world. Was it his decision? Yes. And I had to support it. It's not my choice, it's his.
Yeah. And it's honestly, if you think about it, really, it is probably the best thing that you can do for someone in end of life to really just round out their life experience in a positive way is to listen to what they want to have happen. Because I think that, and I'm remembering now a moment where, again, it was pretty dire circumstances at the end with my grandfather, and he said, I do not want to be resuscitated. And everybody, other than me, because I was really like, that's what he wants. And I get it. If I didn't want to be resuscitated and somebody told me, no, you have to be, I'd be like, go F yourself. I mean,
Yeah.
it just is not what it is. But it got a major reaction from, people who love him. And that made sense to me also. I think that it's a big reaction, and it's a big like, no, it means that the person on some level, conscious, subconscious, knows what's going to happen and knows how they want to handle that situation. But to your point, there was no fighting it at that point, right? There was being upset about it if that's what you wanted to do, or accepting it if that's what you wanted to do. But it is up to the person. It's up to their, wishes and their comfort level. And again, seeing your loved one in a position of suffering just to be alive is not helpful for anyone.
No, and you're giving them their dignity and you're giving them control over this uncontrollable situation.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, what more can you do?
Yeah.
It's great.
I know somebody who was on hospice for 8 months and sat in a room in their home and had someone come play the guitar every day and was on morphine for 8 months, literally, like, and that's what they wanted. And power to them. But
Wow.
yeah, it was, I think, an interesting experience. But that being said, okay, let's say someone is on hospice for quite a while. What does that, I mean, it impacted the family is basically what my question, my lead into the question is. What is your advice for the family about just their capacity, first of all, to handle something that's a longer process? And also, how have you seen in successful cases of a longer hospice period communities kind of come together? Like, is it like a you who wants
Yes.
the person in their house and you
Yeah.
just have a support system, or what's that about?
So yes, I mean, the more death doulas that we have, the better. The more lay people we have wanting to do this work, the better. And part of what we do too is help them come up with a community. So we go through their life, like their church, their neighborhood, their associations, and we try and help them put together a group that's going to help them through this long haul, just by volunteering, just by friendship, even meal trains, anything you can do to form a support group, because that is a long time and it's very draining.
Yeah.
That's a tough thing. I mean, it's
Yeah.
good because the person is doing okay. That's the good news. But it's the support that's hard to maintain.
Yeah. And I think so from my end of the spectrum, right? When I work with any of my clients, I work with very high functioning women usually. And so that means that they're usually pretty in control of most situations and that um, they're very susceptible to burnout, basically, right? This is something that happens. And I have been in situations where people are trying to, help their loved one die, essentially, and are getting really burnt out from it. And not necessarily because they don't have community around them, because I think that most people are willing to kind of step in and help, especially if you have formed good relationships with people in your life. Which is needs to be an episode in its own, right, is just how to foster relationships in your life so that you are in a space where you have community. But I do think that there is this level of reality is that this process can burn people out in a way that is not sustainable. And so when you come in and you talk to families, like, what advice do you give to people who are caregiving? Because I think that it's really hard.
Well, you've got to meet them where they're at, first of all, because they are shell shocked,
Hmm.
right? So you have to help them get familiar with it, and you have to help them with the patient's safety. Safety is the primary thing here because, like I said before, if they get injured, they go to the hospital, two steps back. So you want to make sure you meet them where they're at, that they're safe, you help them form community, and I think that just having this conversation with people in their 30s, we're going to grab lay people and they're going to be able to jump in and do what I do more and more.
Hmm.
That's what we need. We can't do this. We can't, our system isn't made to deal with the numbers that we're going to have.
Yeah.
So if, taking a course like I did, doula givers, I recommend it. I mean, I wish they did it in colleges. Why don't they teach a course for this in college?
I know. Well,
Right?
we might have to do some sort of a course.
Okay.
But
But
I do think, yeah, it's something that is really hard to tell people how to handle. Like, the life coach in me, for example, wants to be like, no, avoid burnout at all costs, even if that's impossible, because it's really damaging to a person's nervous system to be all the way frayed at the end, right? Some
yeah.
people have the capacity, some people don't. But, for me, I think that when I'm talking to anybody who's in a caregiving situation, and it's very, in the moment of this, it's almost impossible to get this through somebody's, psyche, because it's just, they're in it. And when you're in it and you're up close to it, it's really hard to take a step back and see what's functioning and what's not. But we can only be as good for everyone else as we are good to ourselves,
Mhm.
period. If you are not also taking care of yourself, even if it feels so impossible, you have to have moments in your day, in your week, whatever it is, that are solely about making sure that you are also at least restoring some of your energy. Forget about filling your cup, but really just recharging your batteries and giving yourself an opportunity. And maybe that is because you have a community of people who can come and take over for an hour or two, but really remembering to be easy on yourself and to take care of yourself in a way that feels like you're going to be able to sustain some semblance of self.
Right. Because you have to tell yourself, this is going to end.
Yeah.
This is not forever. This is situational,
Hmm.
and there will be burnout. And it happens all the time. You're going through it and you think, wow, this person's ready to transition. Let's say they're 110 years old and it's been great, and then they die and you say, oh wait, I wasn't ready. I know I thought I
Hmm.
was ready, but I'm really not ready. You're never ready, but it's situational. It's going to end. So you are going to be burnt out, but you do have to nourish yourself through it.
Hmm. Yeah.
100%. And back to, we can wind this up on this note, back to you crying in the shower at night when your grandfather was dying. So I do interior design, and whenever I do a master bath, I always say, make sure you have a bench. That's where you go and cry.
It's true.
It's so true.
It's so true. And it's funny because where I was in space and time, that shower did have a bench. And it
Yeah.
was my like end of the day. And it's funny because, yeah, I was not in the moment. I am not someone who is like, hold it together, be strong. Like, it's my nature more than anything to comfort the people around me than to comfort myself. But I'm not comforted by external things, like ever. Like, I'm not comforted by a hug. I'm not comforted by maybe a conversation with the exact right person at the exact right time. But I am comforted by my solitude, my alone time, my shower time. And during that whole process, it was really like that's how I just ended every day. It sounds so sad, but it actually was really
No, it's great
refreshing.
you had it to go to. I mean, I had this woman doing her shower and there was no bench. And I looked at her and I said, there's no bench. And she said, yeah. And I said, well, where do you go to cry? And she said, oh my God, I need to have a bench. We
It's
all
so
need a
true.
bench. We all need a
We all
bench.
need a bench. Yeah, no, it's really it's all encompassing,
Yeah.
like everything is connected on so many levels. The bench in the shower and hospice care. It really goes hand in hand.
It does. I
But
see the thread.
yeah, we see the thread. Wait, speaking of threads, and I do want to talk about this quickly because we asked on threads this past week, if a loved one asked you to do hospice for them in your home, what would you say? And total mixed bag. Like, I think truly it was 50-50. Some people were like, absolutely fucking not. And others were like, best decision I've ever made. I couldn't have seen it any other way. Of course I would do that. So when it does come down to making that decision, first of all, if you are someone who wants to have hospice at home, which is it's seemingly your experience mostly where it happens,
Mhm.
first of all, how do you decide? Like, how do you approach that conversation with somebody?
Oh my God. All right. I'll tell two stories. One, so my dad, after the diagnosis, and so my dad was diagnosed March 13th and died June 9th. So 7.5 weeks diagnosis to death. That's pretty quick.
Yeah.
So when we knew that he was going to do hospice, we were driving home, and he has him go to Dairy Queen. We get a soft serve ice cream. We talk about where he's going to die. And one option was he lived with us, so at home with us. And as I said, I had the 4 kids between 10 and 15, and he said, "Well, I really want to die at home, but I don't want to do that to the kids. It could be, traumatic for them." This was in the car, which is always good because I'm looking ahead, so I'm not crying because I'm not looking at him.
Hmm.
And I said, well, I think this is an opportunity to teach my kids something wonderful. Really, I mean, this is going to create compassionate human beings.
Hmm.
So we get home and he goes to his room, and my youngest, I feel like I always tell Eddie stories, but Eddie says, "Mom, is Nono going to die?" And I said, "Yes, he's going to die." And he said, "Is he going to die this year?" And I said, "Yeah, honey, he's going to die this year." And he said, "Well, is he going to die like in 6 months?" I said, "No, he's going to die sooner than that." And he said, "Oh, well, where's he going to die? I don't want him to die here." And I said, "I 100% understand that. And so if you don't want him to die here, then we won't have him die here." And he said, "Well, what does he want?" And I said, "Well, he wants to die here, but we understand if it's too hard for you." And he said, "Oh, no, he absolutely has to die here. If that's what he wants, then that's what you have to do." And I thought, okay, it's in there. This kid's got it, right? At 10.
Yeah.
So So that's how we decided to do that. And then a year later, I get a call from his brother, same diagnosis. Can I come to your house and do my hospice? Thinking to myself, oh my God, what have I started? But of course he can. Now we know how to do it. You know, you're welcome. But again, it all goes back to the conversations. Either would have been fine. If I said to my father, you know what, Dad, I have 4 little kids. I don't think that they can do it. He would have said, okay. It goes back to the conversation. And also, no is an acceptable answer. If I had said to my uncle, no, I really don't think we can do it, he would have found an alternative. So it's not like a measure of love that if you say yes or if you say no, you know, our relationship's going to be over. It's just a discussion.
Yeah. And I think I mean, it's something that I think is so important in life is to have and keep an open line of communication, because it's these kinds of conversations that people procrastinate, feel awkward, freeze up,
Don't talk
don't know
about.
what to say. Yeah. And if you just have, which you and your dad did, a natural open line of communication, the conversations, good, bad, indifferent, difficult, can also be part of just everyday conversations. And I
Yes.
think, that's a great sort of way to maybe even end this all, is by just saying, if you have a continuous open line of communication with your loved ones, with your community, difficult conversations such as hospice, etc., end of life care, become a lot easier. And if you do not, it becomes this very awkward, tense thing that I think a lot of people build up in their heads as, I can't say anything because what if I, feel rejected, or what if I overstep, or what if whatever the circumstance could be.
Yeah. And I think as a life coach, bringing this into your practice as daily conversations,
Yeah.
we're creating a different culture.
Look at us.
It's great. All right,
Look at
doll.
us. All right, this was great. I hope that people listened to this and really learned something, because I think that, again, over our last couple of months of conversation, I've learned so much about a subject I really knew nothing about. So, yeah, I hope that our listeners are thinking, wow, I just came out
I
of this
learned
with
something.
16 new ideas.
Yeah. And we're going to help people at end of life.
Yes. And by the time this is up, we will have a form on our website all about hospice, about what you want to have happen, and also about just end of life wishes in general. So if you go to backtodeath.com, you can find all of our downloadable forms there. And this is about helping people. And so we want to break this information down in ways that people can, like I said last episode, digest it and absorb it and understand it. It's not meant to be overwhelming. It's meant to be something that everyone has access to, because
Tools.
it's tools, and it's the great equalizer. It's going to affect all of us at some point or another. So
Right. So
knowing about it, talking
let's be
about
good
it.
at it.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, doll. I love you.
All right. I love you too.
Talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.